Hey everyone, this is Michael from michaeldrewmusic.com, and the music theory topic of the day is the minor scale. Now, if you haven't yet seen my video on the major scale, please take a moment and check that out. I'll have that linked in the description down below. Major scales and minor scales are so closely related that this video is going to make much more sense if we already have that grounding in the major scale. So I would ask that you check that out first. And today we're going to be looking at how the minor scale relates to the major scale. We're going to be looking at the different kinds of minor scales that we have. And we're going to be talking about why it's worth learning minor scales. So we're going to jump on over to the keyboard now, and we're going to break down the minor scale. I would like to begin our discussion today by talking about major and minor, and what those two terms are describing in terms of sound. And I think it's safe to say that major keys, in general, are going to be happier sounding. They're going to be brighter sounding. Maybe more lighthearted, more fun, whereas minor keys are going to be more serious. They're going to be darker. They're going to be more mellow. They're going to be more sad and maybe even scary at times. And so when we're talking about major keys, we're talking about songs that are built on major scales that are primarily using major chords. And when we're talking about minor keys, we're talking about songs that are built on minor scales that primarily use minor chords. So when you're listening to music, that's a good thing to do, is always ask yourself, is this song in a major key or in a minor key? In the video on the major scale, we had discussed how the major scale is built on a certain pattern of whole steps and half steps, right? It was whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now the minor scale is different. The minor scale is going to be built on a different pattern of whole steps and half steps. But I want to suggest that we learn the minor scale in a different way. Rather than memorizing a different pattern of whole steps and half steps, what I'd like for us to do is let's think of the minor scale as altering or changing the major scale, okay? Minor scales are not independent. They aren't their own thing out there that have nothing to do with major. Minor and major are closely related, and so that's how I'd like to present this to you today, is we know our major scale. We know that it is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, right? We know that. Now let's look at how the minor scale alters that pattern to give us a different sound and a new set of notes. Now, there are two ways that we can think of how the minor scale relates to the major scale. The first way would be called a relative scale, or as a relative key. And the second way would be parallel. Okay, now let's begin by looking at relative. So last video, when we talked about the major scale, we looked at C major first. I like C major because it's all white keys, right? It's all naturals, no sharps, no flats. So let's start there today. There's a C major scale, right? Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay, now what is a minor scale? A minor scale would be taking that same set of notes and simply shifting down 3 half steps. Okay, so if I take my C's here, we go 1, 2, 3. That brings us down to A. Now, if I play A to A, that would be an A minor scale. Notice, it's the same notes as C major. It's simply starting and ending the pattern on a different note. That's it. That's all it is, right? Now, another way we could find the relative minor would be we would count up 6 scale degrees. So if I count up from C 6 notes, I arrive at A. Either way, it's the same thing, right? So down 3 half steps, or the 6th scale degree in the major scale will give us the relative minor. Okay, so what's the relative minor to the key of E? Okay, so we got E major. What's its relative minor? Well, we can go 1, 2, 3, C sharp, or we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, C sharp. All right, what's the relative minor to the key of F? Here's F, 1, 2, 3, so D minor, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, D minor. So either way, we arrive at D there. So the relative minor has the same key signature as its relative major, but it starts on a different letter name. Okay, so we've got C major, A minor. We've got E major, C sharp minor. We've got F major, D minor, right? So they have different letter names. They start on different notes, but the notes within the two scales are exactly the same, and that's why they're related. Next, let's take a look at parallel minors. Okay, so if I go back to my C major scale here, all white keys, the parallel minor is going to lower the 3rd, the 6th, and the 7th scale degree from the major. So we are going to keep the starting note the same, but we're going to now change the key signature. We're going to change the notes that are within the scale, right? So my 3rd note is E, so that's going to go down to E flat. My 6th note is A, so that's going to go down to A flat. And my 7th is B, so that's going to go down to B flat, and we get this. And that would be C minor. Okay, so parallels are going to start on the same letter name, but have different key signatures, right? So C minor has 3 flats. C major has no sharps, no flats. Now, here's an interesting question. What is the relative major to C minor? Well, to figure that out, we would have to reverse engineer what we learned earlier. Remember we said if we're in a major key, we count down 3 half steps, and that tells us what the relative minor is. So if we know what the minor is, we've got C minor here, and we want to find the relative major, we count up 3 half steps. So from C, 1, 2, 3, that brings us to E flat. E flat has 3 flats, so E flat major and C minor are going to be relatives. C minor is the relative minor to E flat major, but it is the parallel minor to C major. Now that we've looked at how minor scales relate to major scales, let's focus in on minor scales specifically here. And the minor scale is a bit more complicated than the major scale because we happen to have 3 of them, 3 different kinds of minor scales that we're going to talk about today. Now, the first kind of minor scale is natural minor. Now, that's the scale we've already been using today. That's the one that is going to share a key signature with its relative major. Okay, so think C major and A minor. A minor, all white keys, that would be natural minor. But the interesting thing about that is that those two scales are so similar, C major and A minor, that it can be hard to tell the difference sometimes. You know, when you're looking at a piece of sheet music or even when you're listening to a song, those two can be confused and sometimes debated. Is this piece in a major key or is this piece in a minor key? And so composers came up with some ways to distinguish minor from major. And those 2 ways would be called harmonic and melodic. Now let's take a look at harmonic minor first. What does harmonic minor do? It raises the 7th scale degree by 1 half step. Okay, so if we're going to stay in A here, we're going to go A to A, all white keys. My 7th scale degree is G. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take G and sharp it, and let's see what that sounds like. Pretty cool, right? It's a very distinct sound. So that would be called harmonic minor. Now, the third kind of minor scale would be melodic minor. And this one is the most interesting of the 3. What it's going to do is it is going to raise the 6th and 7th scale degree on the way up and then reset back to natural minor on the way down. So it's kind of like half raising 6 and 7 and half natural minor. So once again, looking at the key of A minor, we're going to raise F and G. We're going to sharp the F and the G because that's the 6th and the 7th note in the scale. Going up and coming down, all white keys, natural minor. Let's check it out. Now, an interesting note about melodic minor is that it is almost a major scale. If you look at it, it's raising the 6 and the 7. So what's the difference between a major scale and melodic minor ascending? It would only be the 3rd, right? So you think about, I just played A to A, I sharped F and G. An A major scale would have 3 sharps. So the only note that I'm not sharping would be C. So it's essentially a major scale with just a minor 3rd, which is kind of interesting. And that's why it's got to reset coming back down. You've got to get back into that minor sound. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of start to sound like a major scale. Now, the last thing that I will say about minor scales is that they simply give us more tonal options, right? If we did everything in a major key, then everything would have a major sound, like we talked about at the beginning of the video. Everything would kind of have a bright sound, a happy sound, a joyful sound, and that's great. But that doesn't cover the full spectrum of emotion that we have, right? What about the sad and the solemn and the dark? Those need minor keys. And so it just depends upon what you're going for. The next time you watch a movie, pay attention to the music. Is the music major or is it minor? And that's going to depend upon the scene. That's going to depend upon what kind of a movie it is. But, you'll notice that the composers are going to be matching the emotion with the music. And that's what art is. Art is intended to elicit an emotional response. So depending upon what kind of emotion we are attempting to portray with our music, that will determine whether or not we opt to go with a major key or a minor key. So learn them both, know what they are, and you will have the full range of options when it comes to composing, writing, recording your own music. Well, thanks everyone for taking a look at minor scales and keys with me today. If you have any questions about the minors, please go ahead and comment down below. I love to hear from you. As always, if you can click that thumbs up button on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would really help me out. Have fun making music, hopefully in some minor keys this week, and I will plan to see you next time.